Okay, let's unpack this. We've got quite a few sources here. Articles from places like 9 to 5 Mac, Android Authority, BGR, The Verge,
Mm-hmm.
and they're all homing in on, well, a really significant moment for iPhones and maybe, just maybe, the price tag on your next phone.
Absolutely. The core of this deep dive is this major potential shift in where iPhones get made and the financial ripples that could cause, not just for Apple, but for consumers directly.
Yeah, that's the key part. And the trigger, according to these sources, was some very direct statements recently from President Trump
Mm-hmm.
about where iPhones sold here in the U.S. ought to be built.
Right. So our goal here is to really pull out the most crucial bits from these articles, understand the background, Apple's current strategy, and figure out what this could actually mean. It touches on these huge global supply chains, trade policy. It's complex.
Okay, so let's dive in. The specific threat the sources are talking about, this has just happened, right? May 23rd, 2025.
That's the date. President Trump posted on Truth Social, and it was pretty clear, demanding that iPhones sold in the U.S. must be manufactured, built domestically.
Domestically. And he specifically called out places not to build them.
He did. The quote was, "Not India or any place else." Very pointed.
Wow. And there was a consequence mentioned, a penalty if that doesn't
Yeah,
happen.
a threatened tariff. At least 25%, the statement said.
Now,
Well, that's a big number if it comes to pass.
the 25% hit. Okay. And did it stop just at Apple?
Well, that's what's interesting. Later reporting, based on comments to reporters, suggests maybe not. President Trump apparently mentioned Samsung, other similar products,
Ah, so potentially broader than just iPhones.
potentially. And he flagged a possible start date, too, maybe the end of June. So this could cast a much wider net over the smartphone market.
Okay, right. So this isn't just an Apple issue, potentially. But focusing on Apple for a second, why call out India anyplace else? The sources explain Apple's strategy here, don't they?
They do. Apple's been, trying to diversify its manufacturing for years now, moving away from putting all its eggs in the China basket, so to speak.
And things like COVID, U.S.-China tensions
Yeah,
that just sped it up.
exactly. Accelerated the process. And these articles highlight the specific places they've been moving to. India, Vietnam, Brazil. Those names keep coming up.
Which connects directly back to the statement calling out India.
Precisely. It seems aimed right at Apple's recent, very public moves to increase production in India. The sources talk about Foxconn, Apple's main partner, planning that huge $1.5 billion plant in southern India.
And that plant might even be for U.S. iPhones, potentially.
That's discussed, yes. Possibly for displays, but maybe even sourcing US-bound iPhones from there. So you can see the direct link Trump seems to be making.
And Apple's dealt with tariffs before, right? This isn't totally new territory.
No, they have navigated this landscape. The sources remind us about that earlier 20% tariff on some Chinese goods, the more recent Sentinel tax, also around 20%.
And they got exemptions from even higher ones sometimes.
Yeah, there were those huge 145% tariffs on certain things they managed to avoid. So they have experience in these negotiations. But this demand, it feels different, more specific, maybe more direct.
It does seem different. And experience doesn't mean it's free.
Absolutely not. Costs are always involved somewhere.
So talking costs, what was the immediate reaction? The sources mentioned to the stock market.
Oh, yeah, pretty immediate and not positive. Apple's stock, AAPL, opened down about 2.5% right after the statements. It was hovering around $196. Added to what was already kind of a rough week for the stock, the articles noted.
Okay, so the market got spooked. And if this 25% tariff actually happens, what do the sources say are the likely outcomes?
Well, it's pretty straightforward, really. Two main paths, neither great for Apple. Either the price of iPhones in the U.S. goes up significantly.
Passed on to the consumer.
Onto you. Right. Or Apple tries to swallow that cost itself. But a 25% hit, that would hammer their profit margins. So either way, profitability takes a hit.
And this isn't the first time tariffs and costs have come up recently for Apple, is it?
No, one source actually brings up Tim Cook's comments from the earnings callback on May 1st. He mentioned tariffs could add something like $900 million to cost just in the next quarter.
Wow. $900 million.
Yeah. And while he said they'd been absorbing costs so far, he specifically didn't rule out price hikes down the line. said the situation was, quote, fluid.
Fluid? Well, it just got a lot more turbulent, it seems.
Definitely. And remember the potential broadening. If this tariff does hit Samsung and others, as was hinted.
Then it's not just iPhones getting more expensive.
Exactly. The whole U.S. smartphone market could see price increases. Samsung, Google, everyone faces similar global manufacturing realities. They don't make most of their phones here either, so Android users could feel this too.
So your next phone, whatever brand, could cost more. And one article mentioned the iPhone 17 was already potentially looking at a price bump.
Yeah, those rumors were circulating even before this latest threat, so this could be a double whammy for iPhone 17 pricing if it all lines up.
Which brings us to the big question the sources tackle. Could Apple even do this? Make iPhones in volume in the USA?
And the consensus in these articles, based on experts and historical context, seems to be it's incredibly difficult, maybe impossible at the scale Apple needs.
The scale issue sounds immense. One source had a really striking analogy.
Yeah, citing an Apple manufacturing engineer from years ago, back in 2011, he apparently said that to make the number of iPhones Apple sells globally, we're talking like 200 million a year.
Okay.
You need to hire basically everyone in a city the size of Boston.
The entire city of Boston.
Over 500,000 people. Just for manufacturing, he compared it to Foxconn City in Zhengzhou, China, which employs, what, over 300,000 people? Just massive scale.
So even if it was just for the U.S. market, not global.
Still talking hundreds of thousands of workers. You'd need to hire them, train them on these incredibly complex processes, and pay U.S. wages, which are much higher.
Right. And it's not just assembly, is it? What about all the parts?
That's the other huge hurdle the sources point out. Almost all the critical components, the sophisticated chips, the OLED screens, the casings they're made overseas.
So you'd need factories here just to make the parts for the phones.
Exactly. Entirely new factories requiring even more specialized labor, more investment, and you'd still be importing the raw materials for those components. It's layers upon layers.
Plus, building the actual iPhone factories themselves, they need specific setups.
Highly specific. Custom-built facilities. They don't just exist, waiting. You'd have to build them from the ground up. And kind of ironically, the sources note even the materials to build those factories might face import tariffs.
Wow. So the overall feeling from the expert side is pretty clear.
Yeah, pretty consistent across the board in these articles. The idea of a large-scale, made-in-the-USA iPhone is seen as unrealistic. They even bring up that famous Steve Jobs quote from 2011 telling President Obama, essentially, those jobs aren't coming back.
It's interesting context, especially thinking about how Apple handled things during President Trump's first term.
Right. They managed to navigate those tariff situations, often through quieter negotiations, getting exemptions. But the feeling described in some sources this time is maybe different, more direct. Less room for negotiation, perhaps.
We should probably also mention, just for full context, Apple does invest a lot in the U.S. already, right?
Absolutely. One source notes their huge pledge investing $500 billion in the U.S. over 4 years. That's a massive commitment. Lots of jobs, R&D, data centers.
But that's separate from the actual physical assembly of the iPhone itself.
Correct. It's significant U.S. investment, but distinct from this specific manufacturing location issue.
And the sources touched on the public reaction, too. Some of the, let's say, political dimensions.
Yes, particularly looking at comment sections or analysis within the articles. You see the broader debate emerge about government telling private companies what to do, free markets versus intervention.
Some strong opinions voiced, it sounds like.
Definitely. We saw mentions of terms like dictatorship used by some commenters discussing government mandates on business practices. It's crucial to state we're just reporting that these views were present in the source material, not taking a side. It just shows how charged these discussions can get.
Understood. So bringing it all together, after digging through these sources, what's the big picture here? What's the core issue?
It really seems to boil down to this fundamental clash. On one side, you have a clear political goal, bring manufacturing back, create U.S. jobs. On the other, you have the incredibly complex, globally optimized reality of how high-tech things like iPhones are actually made today.
And right now, it's still a threat, not policy.
Exactly. Emphasis on threat. As Tim Cook said about tariffs before, it's fluid. Whether this specific 25% demand becomes reality, that's still very much uncertain.
Okay, so we've covered the threat itself, Apple's global manufacturing dance, the huge challenges of actually making iPhones here, and what it could mean for prices for Apple and for you.
It paints a really complex picture, doesn't it? Global economics, tech supply chains, domestic politics, all intersecting right here.
It really does. Leaves you thinking.
Absolutely. And maybe the thing to really chew on based on all this, is understanding those trade-offs. The push for national manufacturing goals versus the sheer complexity and efficiency of these global systems, and who ultimately might bear the cost if things shift dramatically. Is it the company or is it you at the checkout?
Definitely food for thought. Well, thank you for bringing these sources to us. Really appreciate you providing the material for this deep dive into a very live situation.